They walked up my driveway. Two men in black vests with HOA written across their chests. One pointed a gun straight at me. The other waited, silent, like a shadow. But what they didn't know was what I was holding behind my back. My hand gripped it tighter. Cold steel, old but still alive. And in that moment I realized the power had shifted. They thought they were here to control me. But the truth was about to break them. Welcome to HOA Stories. My name is Daniel. I'm 72 years old. I've lived in this quiet neighborhood for almost 40 years. Retired carpenter, husband, grandfather. And like many of you watching, I never thought I'd end up fighting my own HOA. But this story is not about grass length or mailbox paint. This is about power. And what happens when the wrong people think they own you. I said this story is not about grass length or mailbox paint. It's about power. And what happens when the wrong people think they own you. It all began on a summer morning. The kind of morning where the sun feels too bright, where the silence of the street feels fake, the kind of morning where you know something is about to happen. I was sitting on my porch, sipping my weak coffee, watching the neighbors water their lawns. They all smiled. Polite little waves. But behind those smiles, I could feel it. Eyes that judged every blade of grass, every crack in the driveway. This wasn't a neighborhood anymore. This was a stage. And the HOA was the director. For years they left me alone. Maybe because I was old. Maybe because I stayed quiet. But then came the letters, one after another. Each one colder. Each one louder. First it was the shed. They said the paint was peeling. They fined me $50. I laughed it off. Thought it was just a warning. Then came the lawn. They said my grass was too shades too brown. Another fine. I ignored it. But when they told me my American flag was too low on the pole, that's when I stopped laughing. I wrote them back. I told them I fought in a war for that flag. I bled for it. And no committee of bored neighbors was going to tell me how high or low I could raise it. No reply. Just another letter. This time with threats, legal action, property liens, even forced compliance. That's what they called it, forced compliance. That's when I knew they weren't playing games. My kids told me to move, said it wasn't worth the stress, but you don't just move from a house you built with your own two hands. You don't just walk away from memories carved into every wall. No, I wasn't leaving. If they wanted a fight, they had found one. The next week, I noticed them watching me, men I didn't know. Younger, hard faces. They didn't look like neighbors. They looked like soldiers without a war. They stood near the HOA president's house, arms crossed, black vests with white letters. HOA. I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. The board had hired their own little enforcement team to intimidate people like me. They followed me when I walked to the store. They parked across the street at night. Headlights off, just waiting. It felt less like a neighborhood, more like a prison camp. Then came the morning of the showdown. I was trimming the hedges when I saw them walking up my driveway. Two men, sunglasses hiding their eyes, radios clipped to their shoulders. One of them had his hand already resting on the grip of his pistol, and I thought to myself, what kind of world is this? When the people who water the same lawns, wave at the same mailman, are now standing on my grass with weapons. They told me I had one last chance, that the board had ordered them to seize illegal property from my home. Illegal property. Do you know what they were talking about? Not drugs, not stolen goods. They meant my old revolver. A gift from my father, passed down through generations. A piece of history more than a weapon. They wanted it gone. I stood there, calm. But inside, I was burning. All the years of respect I gave this neighborhood, all the dues I paid, and now they were treating me like a criminal. The taller one stepped closer. His voice was sharp, but his eyes kept flicking toward the holster on his hip. He told me to put my hands where he could see them, and that's when I smiled, because my hands were already behind my back, holding the very thing they came for. Cold steel, heavy, familiar. I gripped it tight, remembering my father's words. A man's home is his castle, and no one has the right to storm it. They didn't know what I was holding. They didn't know how ready I was, and for the first time, it wasn't me who was scared. It was them. They just didn't realize it yet. The man's hand twitched on his pistol. The sun was bright in his eyes, but I could see the sweat rolling down his temple. He was nervous. Nervous because he didn't know what I was hiding behind my back. The other one stayed quiet. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but not his intent. He stood with arms crossed, chest out, like a statue made to intimidate. They thought silence was power. But silence only gave me time. Time to measure them. Time to breathe. The neighbors were watching. Curtains moved. Blinds tilted. Faces pressed to the glass. Everyone wanted a show, but no one wanted to admit it. That's how this neighborhood worked. Polite smiles in the daylight, but behind curtains, hungry eyes waiting for someone to fall. I felt their judgment. They thought the old man was finished. They thought the HOA had won. The taller man raised his voice. He told me I was in violation. Violation of what? Owning a piece of my own history. In my own home. He didn't say it. But his tone was clear. They didn't come for the gun. They came for me. I remembered my wife's words. Before she passed, she told me never to bend. Never to let them take away the fire that kept me alive. That fire burned now. Not anger, not fear, but something deeper. A line that no one crosses. I loosened my grip, just a little. Enough to make sure the weight was still real in my hand. Cold metal, against my skin. It reminded me of nights long ago, when this revolver sat in my father's drawer, when he told me stories about men who defend their homes, their families, their dignity. He never said it was about violence. He said it was about courage. The man with the pistol took a step closer. His voice cracked just slightly. But he forced it strong. He ordered me again to show my hands. I didn't move. I only stared back. And in that stare, I felt something shift. It wasn't me trapped anymore. It was him. The quiet one finally spoke. His voice low, almost mocking. He said, "Old man, don't make this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed, because wasn't that exactly what they were doing, making life harder than it had to be? All for grass, sheds, flags. And now, family heirlooms. I looked past them. Across the street, the HOA president herself stood on her porch, hands folded, lips tight. She didn't look nervous. She looked eager, like a queen watching her soldiers enforce the law. But queens forget. Sometimes the peasants bite back. My heart was steady. The world felt slower. Even the birds had stopped singing. I opened my mouth, and my words cut the silence. "This is my home," I said, "and I don't answer to you." The taller man shifted his stance. The quiet one adjusted his sunglasses. And for the first time, they both looked unsure. They wanted control, but they didn't have it anymore. The neighbors saw it too. I could almost hear the ear whispers behind the curtains. The old man isn't afraid. The old man is standing tall. Maybe they had been waiting for this. Maybe they had been too scared to do it themselves. The quiet one leaned forward, his voice sharp. He said, "You don't know what you're doing." But I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was drawing a line, and lines, once drawn, can't be erased. My grip tightened again, not because I wanted to use it, but because I wanted them to know I could. That's what scared them most. Not the weapon, but the will. The taller one lowered his gun just slightly. His eyes flicked to the side, to his partner. For a second, I saw hesitation. For a second, I saw fear. And in that second, I realized something. These weren't men of law or order. They were just men of fear, using fear to control others. But fear doesn't work on someone who's lost everything except pride. The president's smile faded across the street. Her soldiers were cracking, her power slipping. And that's when I asked myself, what happens to a kingdom when the king refuses to kneel? The street was frozen in silence. It felt like the whole neighborhood had stopped breathing. The only sound was the hum of a lawnmower far away, drifting on the summer air. But here, on my driveway, time had slowed into something sharp, something dangerous. The taller man kept his gun raised, but his hand was shaking now. Not much, just a tremor. But I saw it. I had seen that same tremor once before. Long ago. In a war. It was the tremor of a man who points a weapon, but isn't sure if he'll dare to use it. The quiet one took a step closer. He wanted to look like the strong one. But strength is not in a voice, not in sunglasses. Strength is in the eyes of the man who refuses to bow, and I refused. The HOA president shifted on her porch. I could feel her gaze drilling into my skin, sharp, unblinking. She thought this was her moment of triumph, the day she showed the neighborhood that the board had absolute control. But she didn't understand yet. Control is fragile, like glass, and when it breaks, the sound echoes forever. I looked up at the flagpole in my yard. My flag was still waving, 1 inch lower than their rules demanded. 1 inch, that's what all this was about. That's why these men were here with guns. That's why my neighbors were hiding behind curtains. 1 inch of cloth. In the summer air, the taller man barked again. He said I was resisting. Resisting what? The right to breathe free air on my own land. The right to live without bending to petty tyrants. I didn't answer. I just stared into his eyes. And he blinked first. The quiet one didn't like that. He stepped forward fast. Too fast. His boots scraped on my concrete driveway. He was close now. Close enough to see his reflection in my kitchen window. And in that reflection, I saw myself. An old man. White hair. Tired eyes. But standing tall, I didn't look weak. I looked alive. I remembered the day I moved here. The house was smaller back then. The grass patchy. The fence half broken. I built it with my wife. Board by board. Nail by nail. We painted the walls together. We planted roses. Every brick here carried my sweat, my laughter, my life. And now, 2 strangers in cheap black vests thought they could take it away. The quiet one reached for my arm. He thought he would grab me, force my hands into the air. But I stepped back. Just 1 step. And that 1 step changed everything. Because it wasn't fear in my eyes. It was defiance. His hand froze midair. He wasn't touching me. But he wanted to. And he knew the moment he did. It would no longer be enforcement. It would be assault. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't ready for that. The taller one hissed at him. Told him to stand down, but the quiet one shook his head. His pride was stung. His authority questioned. He won. Ted to make an example of me. But examples sometimes bite back harder than you expect. The HOA president finally spoke. Her voice carried across the street, sharp as glass. 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, like he couldn't decide whether to charge or run. And behind them, the street was alive with whispers, curtains opening, blinds tilting. 1 by 1, the neighbors stepped closer to their windows, watching like it was a show. But not one of them dared step outside. The sun burned down on us, sweat slid down my back, but my grip on the revolver never slipped, cold steel in my palm. Steady, unshaken. It wasn't just a weapon. It was memory. It was history. It was my father's hand on my shoulder all over again, telling me a man never gives up his ground. The quiet one muttered something into his radio. Static buzzed. The taller man whispered back. They were calling for backup. More HOA cops. The thought almost made me laugh. What kind of world had we built? Where neighbors turned into soldiers over mailboxes and paint. But this was the world now. Suburbia wasn't safe. It was a battlefield of lawns, flags, fences. And today, I was the enemy in their eyes. The president shouted again. Her voice cracked this time. Take it from him. Take it. From me. That's what she wanted. She wanted to strip me of pride, of history, of resistance. But here's the thing about age. They think it makes you weak, but age makes you dangerous, because you have nothing left to lose. The quiet one took another step forward. This time, he reached for his handcuffs. He thought he could bind me like a criminal, but I saw the tremble in his fingers. He wasn't as sure as he wanted me to believe. I raised my voice, loud enough for the whole street, loud enough for every neighbor hiding in the shadows. This is my house, my land, and my life. The words echoed down the block. I saw curtains flutter. As if hearts were beating faster inside, the truth had cracked through the silence. The taller man shook his head. His voice was softer now. He told me to cooperate. To make it easy. Easy for who? For them or for me? Because nothing about this was easy anymore. This was about principle. This was about drawing a line no one could erase. The quiet one lunged again, but I didn't flinch. I held my ground, my shoulders square, my grip unbroken, and in that moment, I saw it, for just a split second. He hesitated, not because of my age, not because of the gun, but because of the look in my eyes. It wasn't rage, it wasn't panic, it was resolve. The kind of resolve that men twice his size, twice his strength, couldn't break. The taller man grabbed his partner's arm. Pulling him back, he hissed under his breath, told him not to cross the line, but the quiet one jerked free. His pride was too deep, his anger too loud, and pride is more dangerous than bullets across the street. The president stepped off her porch. She walked forward slowly, heels clicking against the pavement, her eyes locked on me, cold and unblinking. She wanted to end this herself. If her men wouldn't, neighbors gasped from behind glass. Some even opened their doors just a crack. For the first time, the queen was leaving her throne. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, close enough for me to see the sweat shining on her forehead. She smiled. But it wasn't a smile of confidence. It was a smile of desperation, a smile of someone who knew her power was slipping. But couldn't admit it. She spoke softly, but her words carried weight. "You don't want to do this, Daniel. Hearing my name on her lips felt poisonous, as if she thought knowing me gave her control, but she didn't know me. She never had. I raised my chin. "And you don't want to finish this." Her smile cracked for just a heartbeat. She looked human, scared, small, fragile. The quiet one barked at her, told her not to step closer. Even he knew. The more she moved, the more control she lost. But she ignored him. She kept her eyes on me. "You think you're strong because of that gun?" she said. "No," I whispered, loud enough for every ear. She told them to finish it. Those words sent a chill down my spine, not because I was afraid, but because I realized something. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She wasn't protecting the rules. She was protecting her throne. This was never about lawns or sheds or flags. This was about one woman who couldn't stand the idea that an old man might be stronger than her rules. The neighbors knew it too. I saw their faces pressed against the glass, wide-eyed. Some looked scared, some looked excited, but some, just a few, looked hopeful, like they wanted me to win, like they needed me to win. The quiet one lunged again, this time. His hand gripped my shirt collar, and for a moment, the world went still. I felt the rough fabric twisting against my skin. I felt his breath hot with anger. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned in closer, and I whispered, low enough for only him to hear, "Do you really think she'll protect you when this goes wrong?" He froze, because he knew, deep down, I was right. The HOA president wasn't here for him. He was just a pawn, and pawns get sacrificed. The taller man lowered his gun even more. His eyes darted to the president, then back to me. He looked like a man trapped between two storms. One storm was his orders, the other was his conscience. The quiet one finally let go of my shirt. His hand fell to his side. But his pride was still bleeding. He stepped back, but not in surrender. In frustration, he wanted to act. But something held him back. That something was fear. The president's face twisted in anger. She yelled again, told them not to back down, told them I was dangerous. Dangerous. Me, a 72-year-old man with arthritis and fading eyesight. But maybe she was right, because danger isn't always in the hands. Sometimes, it's in the spirit. I looked straight at her. Our eyes locked across the street, and that lock. I saw the crack in her armor. She wasn't as strong as she wanted everyone to believe. Her power lived in paper fines, empty threats, men in costumes. But me, my power lived in the truth. The taller man finally holstered his gun. His hand was trembling so bad, he could barely clip it back in place. The quiet one cursed under his breath, shoved his sunglasses up his nose. They were breaking apart. Their show of force was falling like cheap stage props, and the neighborhood saw it all. They saw their mighty HOA cops falter in front of an old man. They saw their president's smile fade into panic. They saw the lie for what it was, a system built on fear. Only works when fear is believed. And I no longer believed. I took a step forward, closer to them. My voice was calm, steady, sharp. This house stands, and so do I. The quiet one turned his head away. The taller one kept staring at the ground, and across the street. The president's hands shook just slightly. Her crown was slipping, her control crumbling, and then it hit me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was everyone's fight. Every neighbor who had been fined for a garden gnome, every widow who had been told her fence was too rustic, every family who had been threatened over paint colors, they were all watching, they were all waiting, and I thought to myself, maybe the question wasn't whether I could win. Maybe the question was, would anyone else have the courage to stand with me? The president's voice cut across the street again, sharp, cold, almost shaking. She told them to hold their ground, to make an example of me. She wanted my fear, my surrender, my humiliation. But all she got was silence. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I only stood taller. The taller man rubbed his wrist nervously. His gun was already holstered, but his body was stiff. He was caught between loyalty to Sorry. And the truth he felt in his bones. The quiet one kept shifting his weight. I'm strong because you can't take it from me. The neighbors gasped again, one by one. Doors began to open wider, feet stepped onto porches, eyes shone with something new. Not fear, not curiosity, but courage. I realized then, this wasn't just my fight anymore. This was the spark of something bigger, a rebellion against pettiness, against tyranny, dressed as rules. The neighbors were watching, waiting, and if I stood tall enough, long enough, maybe they'd find their own strength. The quiet one cursed again. His hand shook now, his mask cracking. The taller man looked ready to walk away altogether, and the president, oh, she looked furious. Her lips curled into a snarl, her hands clenched tight. She was losing, not just to me, but to the truth, and truth spreads faster than fire. The street was alive with murmurs. I heard one neighbor whisper, "He's right." Another said, "Why are we letting them do this?" It was small, but it was growing. The seed of resistance. The quiet one finally snapped. He shouted at the neighbors, told them to get back inside, but no one moved. Not this time. The fear was gone, and once fear is gone, power has nothing to hold on to. I took a deep breath. The air was heavy, hot, but it filled me with fire. This was my stand, and I wasn't backing down. The president looked at me one last time, her eyes full of hatred, but her body trembling. She hissed through clenched teeth, "This isn't over." And then she turned sharply, storming back across the street. Her soldiers followed, broken, humiliated, and the neighbors stepped out just a little further, their eyes wide, their lips curling into the faintest smiles. I lowered my hands, but I didn't let go of the revolver, because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The board would come back, the president wouldn't forgive, and the neighbors, they had fed on. Nally seen the truth. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the lawns. The air felt different, lighter, but heavier with meaning. Something had changed, forever. And as I stood on my driveway, revolver in hand, neighbors watching in silence, I asked myself, was this the day the neighborhood broke free? Or was this the day the real war began? The street went quiet after they left. The sound of their boots faded. The click of the president's heels echoed into the distance. And then, silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This was heavier, deeper, like the silence right before a storm tears through the sky. The neighbors lingered on their porches. Some crossed their arms. Some whispered in low voices. Some avoided my eyes. But a few looked straight at me, and in their gaze, I saw it. A shift. They weren't just watching anymore. They were deciding. I stood there for a long time, revolver still firm in my hand. The air was hot, sweat dripping down my neck. But my heart was calm for the first time in years. I felt alive, but deep inside, I also knew the truth. This wasn't over. The board didn't lose gracefully, and the president, she wasn't going to forgive what just happened that night. I barely slept. Every sound felt louder than usual: the creak of the old wooden floor, the hum of the fridge, the rustle of leaves outside my window. I kept the revolver by my bedside, not because I wanted to use it, but because the fear of what might come was worse than the weight of steel beside me. The next morning, the first letter came, slipped under my door, not even mailed. The paper was thick, the words typed bold. Notice of violation. Hostile conduct. Hostile conduct. That's what they called it, standing on my own driveway, refusing to bow. They wrote that I had endangered the community, that I had violated codes of civility. And the fine wasn't $50 this time, it was $500. It was ours. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't end with words. People like her don't surrender quietly. When power slips, they claw for it harder. And if letters and fines didn't break me, I feared what she might try next. And as I sat in that dark room, listening to the angry voices of my neighbors and the trembling fury of the president, I asked myself something I still don't know the answer to. The rebellion grew louder with each passing day. It started small, whispers on porches, quiet nods at the mailbox. But soon, it was shouting across fences. It was neighbors standing in groups at night, arguing about rules, about freedom, about fear. The president didn't hide anymore. She patrolled the street like it was her kingdom, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. Her heels clicked like a metronome of control, but the rhythm was breaking. I kept receiving letters, stacks of them. Some were fines, some were warnings, some were threats. They accused me of inciting disorder. They called me a danger to the harmony of the community. And yet, harmony had already died the moment she brought armed men into my yard. The neighbors were divided now. Half of them clung to her power. They believed order was safety, that without the board, chaos would destroy the neighborhood. The other half, they were waking up. They saw what I saw. They saw that order built on fear was not order at all. It was a prison. One evening, I stepped outside to water the roses. The air was heavy, clouds hanging low. And across the street, two neighbors were shouting. One man accused the other of ruining property values by siding with me. The other shouted back, said property values weren't worth chains. It almost came to blows. And as I stood there, hose in my hand, I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. This was a civil war of lawns and mailboxes. The resident fueled it. She sent her HOA cops door to door, not with guns this time, but with warnings, pamphlets. They told neighbors to stay in line, to remember their duty. But every pamphlet tossed in the trash was another nail in her coffin. Still, she didn't stop. One night, I found a notice pinned to my door. It wasn't a fine this time. It was a summons, a meeting in the clubhouse, mandatory attendance. The board was calling a hearing against me. I laughed when I read it. But inside, I felt the weight of it. This was her last stand. She wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. She wanted to make me bend, or break, the night of the meeting. I walked into the clubhouse. The air was thick with whispers. Dozens of neighbors filled the chairs, their faces tense, their eyes darting between me and her. The board sat at a long table, the president at the center like a queen on her throne. Her smile was tight, but her eyes were blazing. She banged the gavel on the table. The sound echoed through the room. "Order," she said. But there was no order here, only fear, and fear was slipping. She read the charges against me: hostile conduct, failure to comply, incitement of unrest. Her voice dripped with venom. She spoke like a judge, but I knew better. She wasn't justice, she was vengeance. When she finished, she demanded I speak. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. I stood tall, cleared my throat, and let the words flow. "I am guilty," I said. Gasps filled the room. The president's smile widened. For a second she thought she had won, but I raised my voice louder. "I am guilty of standing for what is mine, guilty of protecting my home, my flag, my history. And if that makes me guilty, then maybe all of you are guilty too." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Neighbors looked at one another. Some nodded. Some frowned. But the silence was breaking. I pressed on. "You've all been fined, threatened, humiliated. You've paid money for grass, for fences, for flowers. And for what? To keep one woman happy? I almost laughed, but the anger burned hotter than the humor. $500 for standing tall. $500 for refusing to let them steal what wasn't theirs. I crumpled the paper, tossed it into the trash. But an hour later, another knock came. This time, a courier. An envelope with legal stamps. Inside, a threat. If I didn't comply, they'd put a lien on my home. My home. The one I built with my own hands, the one I raised my children in, the one where my wife's laughter still lingered in the walls. They wanted to take it. I sat at the kitchen table, letter spread out, coffee going cold. I thought about giving in, just for a moment. Not because I was scared of losing the fight, but because I was tired, 72 years old, and still fighting battles younger men had the strength to carry. But then, I looked out the window. The flag waved gently on the pole. 1 inch too low by their rules, and that 1 inch reminded me. This was never about grass, never about sheds, never about paint. It was about control, and I wasn't built to kneel. The days that followed were war, not with guns, but with paper. Every morning, a new letter. Every afternoon, another fine. Noise complaints when I mowed too early. Unapproved modifications when I painted the porch railing, even the roses my wife planted decades ago. Suddenly, not in compliance with HOA-approved plant species. It was madness, a war of ink and envelopes. They thought they could drown me in words, but they didn't know. Words can be weapons too. I started writing back. Simple, sharp, relentless. I quoted their own rulebook against them. I measured every fence post, every railing, every inch of my property. I pointed out violations in their own yards. The president's mailbox was half an inch too tall. The vice president's patio lights weren't the right shade of white, one by one. I buried them in their own rules. The neighbors started to notice. At first, they looked at me with pity, shaking their heads, but then, some of them began to whisper. A woman from 3 houses down slipped me a note one morning. She thanked me, said she had been fined 3 times for the color of her curtains, said she wished she had stood up sooner. Another man, quiet for years, nodded at me as he walked his dog. Small gestures, but they mattered. The board didn't like that. They doubled their efforts. 2 more men in black vests appeared on my street. They parked their truck near my lawn, sat there for hours, staring. They didn't say a word, didn't even get out. They just sat, like vultures circling overhead. The president stopped waving altogether. No fake smiles now, just cold eyes when she passed my house. Her mask was gone. She wanted me broken, and she wanted everyone else to see it. But the more she pushed, the more cracks formed in her kingdom. Neighbors who never spoke started murmuring louder. People who used to obey without question began questioning everything. Why were the dues so high? Where was the money really going? Who gave her the right to hire armed men for lawn disputes? The questions spread like wildfire, and I just kept standing, day after day, letter after letter, threat after threat, and with every fine, every notice, every empty warning, I felt less like a victim and more like a spark that could burn their paper palace to the ground. One night, I heard voices outside. I looked through the blinds, saw a group of neighbors gathered near the president's house. Some argued with her on the porch, voices sharp, hands waving. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the sound. It was rebellion. It was the sound of people finally breaking chains, she shouted back at them. But her voice wasn't commanding anymore. It was desperate. The queen's crown was slipping further. I leaned back, revolver still close at hand, and I smiled for the first time in weeks, because the war wasn't just mine anymore. To keep her crown shiny. But what has it given you? Fear, debt, chains. The president slammed her hand on the table. Enough, she shouted. Her voice cracked. She tried to cut me down, but her anger only proved my point. The neighbors murmured louder. A woman in the back stood up. She said she too had been fined for her roses. Another man spoke up, about his shed, about the threats. One by one, voices rose. The room turned into a storm. The president banged the gavel again and again, but the sound was drowned out by the crowd. Her power was slipping through her fingers, and I stood there, watching it fall. The quiet one from her HOA cops was in the corner, his sunglasses gone this time, his eyes darting nervously. He didn't look strong anymore. He looked small. Even he knew. The tide had turned. The taller one sat stiff, arms crossed, but his face pale. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them dared. The president screamed for silence. Her voice broke, and then silence came. But it wasn't her silence. It was ours. The silence of neighbors who had finally seen the truth. I looked her in the eye, and I said the words she feared most. "You don't own us." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some shouted. Some cried. It was chaos. But it was freedom. And in that chaos, her crown shattered. She stormed out of the room. Her board members scrambled after her. The gavel lay on the table. Abandoned, the queen had fled her throne, but even as the neighbors cheered, even as hands clapped my shoulders, I felt something deep in my chest. This wasn't the end. People like her don't vanish quietly when power is taken. It always tries to return. That night, I walked home under the heavy clouds. The air smelled like rain, like change. Neighbors waved. Some even walked beside me. For the first time, I wasn't alone, but in the back of my mind, I knew the war wasn't over. It had oddly changed shape, and if paper and meetings couldn't break me, what would she try next? I locked my door, placed the revolver back on the nightstand, and sat by the window. The flag outside swayed in the wind, 1 inch too low, 1 inch that started it all, and I whispered to myself, this fight isn't finished. Not yet. The night after the meeting, the air felt different. It was heavy, restless, like the whole street was holding its breath. Neighbors who once avoided my eyes now nodded as they passed. Some even whispered words of thanks. But beneath it all, I felt something else, a shadow. Because I knew her, and people like her don't surrender. They retreat. They plan. And then they strike again. The president's house stayed dark for 2 days, curtains drawn, porch empty. No sound of her heels clicking down the sidewalk. Some neighbors said she was gone, that she had been humiliated and fled, but I knew better. I had seen the look in her eyes when she stormed out of the clubhouse. It wasn't defeat. It was rage. On the third night, I heard the sound of engines. 2 black trucks rolled slowly down the street. Not police, not delivery. HOA men. More of them this time. Not just 2, but 6. Their vests marked with those same white letters, their boots striking the pavement in rhythm. They weren't here to watch anymore. They were here to finish what they started. I stood on my porch, the revolver heavy in my pocket. My hand brushed the grip, my mind calm but sharp. They walked in formation, like soldiers without honor, and behind them, stepping from her house, came the president, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't smile this time. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. She had come for me. The neighbors spilled onto porches again. Some whispered, some gasped, but none stepped forward. Not yet. They wanted to see how far this would go. The men stopped at the edge of my driveway. The tallest one barked my name, said I was in violation of community law, said I had resisted authority, incited rebellion. Said the board had voted to remove me from the neighborhood, remove me from my own house, from the walls I built with my own hands, from the roses my wife planted, from the flag that flew every morning. They thought their vote erased my blood in this ground. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I only stared. The president stepped forward. Her voice was calm now. Too calm. She told me it was over, that I had lost, that resistance was useless. She said no matter how loud I shouted, the rules were stronger than me. She thought words could break me, but words only burn when you believe them. And I didn't. I raised my chin, let my voice carry down the street. You don't own me. You don't own this house. And you don't own these people. The neighbors stirred. Some clapped quietly. Others whispered louder. The men in black shifted uneasily. Their formation wasn't so tight anymore. The president's eyes narrowed. She gave the order. Remove him. 2 of the men stepped forward, heavy boots striking against the concrete. I pulled the revolver from my pocket, not to fire, not to threaten, but to remind them that some lines, once crossed, can never be stepped back from. Gasps filled the air. Neighbors leaned forward. The men froze mid-step, their eyes locked on the steel in my hand. Their confidence cracked. The president shouted again, her voice shrill, "Take it from him!" But her words fell flat, because fear had shifted. It wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. The quiet one from before was there too. He wasn't wearing sunglasses this time, and for the first time, he spoke not to me, but to her. "This isn't right." The crowd gasped again. The president whipped her head toward him. Her face twisted. She screamed at him to shut up, but he didn't. He stepped forward, put his hand on the taller man's arm, and said it again. "This isn't right." The taller man hesitated. He looked at me, then at the neighbors, then at the president. His grip on his holster loosened. He stepped back. The formation broke. 6 men reduced to confusion, their power draining into the hot summer night. The president lost control. She screamed, shouted, cursed. Her words spilled into madness. She called me dangerous, called me a traitor, called me unfit to live here. But the neighbors weren't silent anymore. They stepped off their porches, one by one, slowly at first, then faster. They crossed the street, stood beside me, not with guns, not with weapons, with presence, with defiance. Dozens of them, men, women, even children clinging to their parents. A wall of people, tired of chains, tired of fear, tired of her. The president's face drained white. Her men looked around, their confidence gone. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were just men in costumes, and costumes don't protect you when the curtain falls. I lifted the revolver into the air, pointed it at the sky, and pulled the hammer back with a loud click, not to fire, but to speak without words, and the sound echoed louder than her gavel ever had. Silence fell, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of choice, of truth, of courage. The president's knees shook, her voice broke into a whisper. "This isn't over." But everyone knew it was. Her crown had shattered, her army had scattered, her neighbors had turned. She turned and fled back to her house. Her men followed. Broken shadows in the dark, and the street erupted. Cheers, claps, laughter. For the first time in years, real freedom hung in the air. I lowered the revolver, tucked it back into my pocket. Neighbors crowded around me. They asked how I did it, how I stood so tall, how I never bent. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired, old, heavy, because battles don't end with cheers, they end with scars. That night, I sat on my porch long after everyone went inside. The street was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. It was lighter now, but I knew somewhere inside that dark house, the president was plotting. People like her don't give up. They wait. They bide their time. They claw for the crown again. But maybe, just maybe. The neighborhood had learned something tonight, that power isn't in papers. It isn't in fines or threats. It isn't in fear. It's in people, standing together. Refusing to kneel, the flag above my porch swayed gently, still 1 inch too low, still enough to start a war. But now, it wasn't just my inch, it was everyone's, and as the stars lit the sky, I whispered to myself, maybe the real fight isn't against boards or rules or presidents. Maybe the real fight is against fear itself. So tell me, if you stood face to face with power, with fear, with control dressed as law, would you bow your head, or would you stand tall and let the whole street see who you really are?